New year, new me. Yeah, I'm sure no one's made that joke before about Doctor Who, Jessie. Hello interwebs and welcome to a brand new year. It's 2021. I'm sure everything's gonna be great from now on. That was after the hellscape that was 2020. But even beyond that, of course, we're starting off the year off right with a brand new Doctor Who special, Revolution of the Daleks, the return of Jodie Whittaker, and starting off, I guess, kind of the third series of her run, or at least the sort of beginning of her next arc, and my earring just fell off, so that's the thing that just happened. That's gonna tell you what I feel about this episode. Yes, kind of like my earring here, in a very weirdly symbolic way, I felt that this episode started off really, really strong, and kind of fell apart as it went on. No spoilers, by the way, up front, but I will be getting into spoilers in just a second. But to continue on my spoiler-free thoughts, I thought there was some really great setup at the top of this episode. I loved picking up right where we left the Doctor at the end of the last series, stuck in that prison, and I thought there was some fun usages of that setup between the companions being separated from the Doctor kind of being on her own after this big revelation of her life of the impossible child, which I didn't really love, but if they are going to do that, I'm glad they are actually have carried weight forward, both mostly emotionally in this episode, not necessarily in a plot way, but definitely having an emotional toll on the Doctor. And then bringing Captain Jack back in a very, very fun way, and that's not really a spoiler, it's in all the posters and everything, and the hype for this episode. So all of that stuff was really great, and even more so, I thought how they set up the Daleks in this episode was brilliant. I was actually very excited to see what they were going to do with this setup of, this is in the first 10 minutes or so, basically having the Daleks be police officers, which makes perfect sense to me. They're clearly evoking the protest movements that went on this summer and the sort of discussions around police brutality and police force usage. At least that's what they're trying to get to with the Daleks. And, not to be overly political, but the episode itself is very political. Putting Daleks, literal fascist metaphors, into the police officer position certainly carries with it some heavy political implications that I was very curious to see what Doctor Who was going to do with, because that is honestly one of the most leftist things I've ever seen, big budget, wide-reaching sci-fi show of this scale do, and I was even more so than Star Trek, and I was so very excited to kind of see what they had to say. And ultimately, what I was disappointed by was that it felt like it had nothing to say. And in fact, as the episode went on, it kind of became clear that the writers, Chris Chibnall in specific, without condemning him in any way, just seemed to not be interested in their own plot. Because, again, before I get into spoilers here, just kind of stopped. The plot just kind of stopped and just spun its wheels for a while and then ended. And there was no real fun in it. It just kind of happened. And the only stuff that kind of was interesting was the character interactions, which I'll talk about more specifically in a second. But even those just kind of blot along until the end and kind of gave us a couple good moments in there that I'll touch upon. But overall, just kind of felt underwhelming, and especially in the last beat of this episode, a little bit weird. So yeah, I have to be quite honest, I found this very underwhelming and honestly kind of frustrating, because the first 15-20 minutes of this episode were fantastic and really intriguing, and then it just seemed to stop caring halfway through. Kind of like my earring. See how I brought that full around? Like there was a completion and an arc. I'm sorry to kind of end my spoiler-free section on kind of a dour note, but it's honestly kind of the impression that I was left with after watching this. So let's get into spoilers to talk about it a little bit more specifically. I did find a lot to love in the top of this section. The opening bit with the Doctor in the prison worked wonderfully for me. I know it was a lot of little member berries moments, like, oh, look, it's the silence. Oh, look, it's the angels. Oh, look, it's the Taping. Oh, look, it's an Ood. I thought that was a bit fan servicey and a bit oh, look, here's the creature features that you all really like. But honestly, in a kind of holiday episode like this one is, a New Year's special or a Christmas special, I don't mind that stuff as much. It's kind of meant to be a little bit more of a fun, hey, kind of a rompy kind of feel to it. So that stuff doesn't bother me as much as it would, say, during a, regular episode of the show. And I actually kind of enjoyed it here. And I liked just showing the Doctor kind of being off her game, kind of just depressed and lost and lost in her own identity. But still kind of having a kernel of her like joyous, like friendly self. She still was kind of being nice to the other creatures there. And there was some good little jokes and interplay. Like I love when she said the silence, oh, I forgot you were there. All that was really, really well done. I thought visually it was great, and I thought it worked wonders for the characterization of the Doctor. And the escape with Jack was honestly kind of fun. Yes, it is just them kind of running down the corridor, and there's like this crazy little sci-fi device that gets them through stuff, but I thought their interplay was a lot of fun, and I love the hug that they give each other at the end when, you know, he like pulls out his you know, where was that hidden time agent device. I like the little callbacks throughout here. Again, I don't mind, like, even his square gun later on in the episode, I don't mind those callbacks as much in this type of episode. In fact, I find them more necessary here than anywhere else in any other type of episode. I think bringing them up in a special like this is great. So all that was a lot of fun, and I just enjoyed seeing Jack finally bounce off of Jodie's Doctor, and I think they had fairly strong chemistry. It wasn't as strong as I'd seen with them in, like, say, David Tennant or even Christopher Eccleston. I would say it's probably the weakest chemistry, but that's because those doctors and Jack had a lot more time. This is their first appearance, and I think for their first appearance and just sort of selling that, like, age-old relationship that they have, I think worked pretty well and sold it very well, even though they're two actors working for the first time together. They felt like they had known each other for a very long time. So great job to both Jack Barrowman and Jodie Whittaker for their performances there. All of that's great. But beyond that, I already mentioned most of my thoughts about the Daleks at the top of this episode. I liked the idea of them being used as police weapons and police officers. I thought that was very, very smart. I thought that was a interesting and very politically charged way to use the Daleks. And I was, again, curious to see where that went. The other thing, too, is I was actually kind of interested in the setup for the companions, seeing Yaz, Ryan, and Graham all at a sort of different place in their life 10 months on from leaving the Doctor at the end of the last series. I like seeing that Yaz was a little bit like off her game and still obsessively looking for the Doctor, kind of hinting towards that idea of Yaz having feelings for the Doctor that we've all kind of known and not being really ready to let go of her feelings. I loved all of that. I thought that was wonderful, and I like that they sort of pick up on, oh, there are Daleks here. We need to deal with this situation, and we have to deal with it on our own. And then this is where the episode starts to break down quite a bit for me. Because then we get these scenes where they go and confront the Donald Trump allegory guy from last season, which I was fine with him being here. Again, if you're going to have a politically charged episode about, like, literal fascist metaphors being used for police, it makes sense also to have Trump in here. Might as well go for broke. I'm fine with that. I didn't find his use throughout this episode as egregious as Arachnids in the UK. I don't mind being so directly political and allegorical, and I thought he was fine here. But the companion's plan is just to go up to him and confront him, stupidly, and then they sort of set up like, oh, they're going to actually go and do something more. Like, they're going to try and take on doing this without the Doctor, and I like that. I like that, like, oh, we're going to be competent without her. But then the very next scene, she shows up with Jack. And so it just felt like it was undercutting the sort of arc that these characters are going on, like they can be independent from the Doctor for once. And obviously, I guess not. As the episode goes on, though, I just found the main plot of this episode just to be kind of disappointing and muddled and ultimately pointless. You know, the Doctor finds out where the Daleks are, they're being made, and they exposition at the Doctor for a very long time and just give her all the information as she sort of sits there as expositing and figuring things out. And oh, the light that ultimately turns out to be a teleporter that no one cares about. It's just a lot of exposition to get us to the point of like, oh, okay, so the Daleks are now in the police bodies. Okay, I was like, okay, cool. They're in the police bodies. They're going to be police forces. There's going to be you're bringing the Prime Minister into this. All of that's going to be like interesting usage of this metaphor of police brutality. But then we get to how the Doctor solves this. And how the Doctor solves this very intriguing plot development that I was kind of interested in what the political ramifications for this would be, and something that the episode seemed to be setting up that they would be dealing with political ramifications of, considering they literally have the Prime Minister and Donald Trump allegory being main characters throughout the story. They just say, oh, the Doctor's like, oh, I'm going to call in more Daleks to defeat these Daleks, but then we'll have to deal with the Daleks that I brought in. And I'm like, okay, so you're just going in a circle? It just felt like 20 minutes of, okay, we're going to get rid of the interesting Daleks that we had to bring in the old Daleks that we all know and aren't particularly intriguing within the plot of this episode, and then we're going to deal with them. It's like the episode had no desire to actually handle the ideas that it was bringing up within its own plot, and it was just very frustrating. It felt like 20 minutes of wasted time from a plot level. And while I ultimately liked the overall, like, resolution, I should say, of the episode with the Doctor tricking the Daleks into the other TARDIS that we know she had, sort of like getting rid of that little tied end, and also being it was set up in the beginning of the episode. I thought all of that was smart, kind of clever and intriguing, but I just don't get why she couldn't have done that with the police Daleks. Why that it all had to go through this whole random cycle to begin with. Why she couldn't just trick them into the TARDIS in the first place. And again, while I like the idea of Daleks killing the impure Daleks, that's definitely an idea we've seen throughout Doctor Who before, so it's not adding anything new. So you're sacrificing this intriguing new type of Dalek that actually could say something meaningful politically, allegorically, or whatever you want to say with it, but you're just sacrificing all that just for the same storylines we've seen a bunch of times before. It was just ultimately so frustrating and disappointing and not fun. I would have even been okay with it if there was some fun involved in any of it, but there was no scene that was like, oh, this is fun. The companions just go on the ship and plant some bombs. And Donald Trump's everywhere. I don't his name's Jack or something. He kind of isn't Donald Trump allegory, but it even bothers me a little bit to use him as a Trump allegory so directly. And again, I don't find him as egregious in this episode. Like, hey, he's Donald Trump. But I guess I'm carrying the baggage of his previous appearance into this episode a little bit because it just felt weird that they were making a lot of jokes at his expense, and maybe I'm the SJW leftist snowflake, but it's just like, I don't really want to just have Donald Trump along for the jaunt, along for the ride, and just kind of like make like little ooh-hoo-hoo jokes at his expense. It's like, if you're going to bring that character in, I thought using him to make fascist police robots was a great use of him. But then you just have him just be along for the ride and again, not say anything with him. And it just made me kind of feel weird at the very least, uncomfortable at the worst. It just made me uncomfortable to have him along for the ride. And the episode just kind of just being like, this guy, right? Yeah, he's annoying. It just felt like too easy of a way to sort of deal with him when you've already had him be the Trump metaphor set up from before. And again, that's not necessarily this episode's fault, but I honestly would have just preferred a new type of character. All that being said, I've been incredibly negative on this, and I am sorry about this. I hate being the person who is negative. I don't like doing negative reviews, but I also have to be honest about my opinions. So I found all that rather frustrating. What I will say, though, to end this review on some large-scale positives was I did genuinely enjoy the smaller character beats. As I said, I am glad that while I did not love, I didn't hate the impossible child. I didn't hate that concept. It did chosen one-ify the Doctor too much for my taste, so I don't love it, but I'm not like hating it as much as my friend and fellow YouTuber Council of Geeks really just despises that plot development. I was fine with it, but I'm glad that if they were going to deal with that they at least had to have emotional weight in this episode. And I kind of like the subversion here between the Doctor and her companions. I love the moment between her and Ryan where Ryan says change is okay. And I initially was uncomfortable with it, thinking like the Doctor, the person who changes bodies all the time, is the one that needs a lecture on change being okay. But when I thought about it, that makes sense. Her pillars of identity have completely changed after the impossible child. She does not know who she is. Changing bodies is, night and day for her. She does that all the dang time. It's not something particularly new. But when your own sense of who you were overall, like your place in the world, has been so cosmically shifted. This is the biggest change in her life that she has ever had, and it is monumentous compared to just changing bodies. At least that's probably how it feels to her at the very least. And so I appreciated that they actually took that into account and kind of subverted her being the wise one that gives advice and sort of had her companions giving her advice. And I thought the moment between her and Graham was very, very sweet. Another moment, too, is I loved the moment between Jack and Yaz in this episode. I loved the moment where Yaz is sort of like complaining. It's like, she abandoned me. I was hurt. I was cast aside. And how do you deal with this? And Jack just sort of understanding was like, yeah. You don't get to choose when you get to be with a Doctor, but you got to enjoy the time that you have. It's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. And I liked that sort of idea, and hinting at this idea that Yaz and the Doctor kind of will have a romantic thing going on, which I am so here for and so down for. I want that to actually be the case. So I hope that those hints are kind of paid off. And considering the amount of makeup that Yaz was using at the end of the episode when she was like coming back into the TARDIS, I'm like, okay, someone's trying a bit hard here to look attractive for the Doctor, which again, I am so down for it and very excited for it. I will say I found it a little bit disappointing how desperate Yaz was to get back with the Doctor. I would have liked to see her gain a little bit of independence, but I'm hoping that that's actually sort of set up for an arc throughout the next series, that Yaz might be a little bit too codependent and needy on the Doctor. We'll sort of see how that goes, because I don't necessarily think it's bad in this episode. I actually think it's really well done. I just hope that the show is properly critical of Yaz's character arc going forward. I think that that would be an actually very intriguing way to take the character. So I'm very excited to see where that goes. And the goodbyes at the end of the episode made perfect sense. A little bit forced because we knew that Graham and Ryan were going to be leaving the show. But I thought that their goodbye scene was handled very, very well. Like Ryan saying, like, I want to go off with my mates and be with them. We kind of saw hints of that last series. I would have liked to see a little bit of it in this episode. Again, I would have rather see a little bit more of them being independent towards the top of this episode, like maybe Ryan using his mates to figure out the plan of the Daleks, something like that, just to sort of show his independence a little bit more within the context of this episode. But as it was, I thought it worked well, and I loved the reason Graham chose to leave as well. I thought him saying, like, I do want to explore, but I don't want to miss time with my grandson. That's more important to me, even though he kind of was kind of given, like, I would like to do both, but this one is more important, so I have to sacrifice a little bit to be with him. So I thought all that worked very well, and I thought their goodbye fan moment was wonderful, and I like the Doctor sort of, like, being a little bit lost because of that. You could really sense that in Jodie's performance, that this is the first time in her life that she hasn't had, or at least this version of the Doctor's first time she hasn't had her fam, and coming at this crucial moment in her life is got to be life-changing for her and her sense of identity. So I thought that's a smart way to take the character. I thought it was a good exit for those two characters, and I'm sure we'll see them pop up at some point in the near future. But I liked that exit. I also like the little, like, reminder of Gwen Cooper from Torchwood. I'm just glad to know that she's around, popping around with her son. I love Torchwood quite a bit, and I just recently watched Children of Earth, and I'm glad to see that Gwen is still around, and I really hope we get some Torchwood cameos. I will say it was a little bit sad that Jack didn't get a goodbye towards the end of this episode, but again, I'm hoping Jack will appear and pop up a little bit later at some point. But again, I was a little bit disappointed to get much. I will also say that while I did enjoy the scene with Jodie and Jack, and also Yaz and Jack, I was a bit disappointed overall that Jack didn't feel more necessary to the plot. Yes, he was necessary to break the Doctor out of the prison, but then after that, he's just sort of there and doesn't really add much to the plot of this episode other than just being one of the way too many companions that the Doctor has. So I'm really hoping that he does show up again, because it felt fun to have him when he was just with the Doctor on his own. But when he was just a part of a bunch of companions, it just felt like we were not really getting a chance to really see the Jack that we love. And so that was a bit saddening to sort of end on with his character. I will end on one last negative, though, and this is where I'll end. I did find the last scene between Graham and Ryan to be a little bit clunky and weird. I like the moment where they were sort of calling back to the very first scene of Series 11 when we first met these characters, with him learning to ride his bike. I thought that was a very sweet ending, but then we get this ghost of Ryan's grandmother and Graham's husband. I forget her name, I apologize, but we get this, like, weird ghost of her, and it was just clunky. It was just very clunky and awkward and weird, and kind of was like, oh, okay, and just felt off to me, and just felt like the writers couldn't find a better way to evoke that character. It's like, oh, something was in my eye. It just felt weird, and I would have rather them have evoked her in lines, like saying, like, oh, I wish she was here. Like, oh, I wish someone was here. Oh, you mean you wish the Doctor was here? No, I wish she was here, or my grandmother was here. I would have liked a bit like that. I think that would have hit me a little bit harder than this weird, awkward CGI ghost thing. So it just ended the episode on just a kind of a strange note. So, yeah, I am sorry. I do apologize. You know me. I dislike being the person who does not like something. But I also want to be the person who is honest in my reviews. So yeah, I thought there were some redeeming parts of this episode. There were things that I liked, especially the small character beats with the Doctor, and especially the first 15-20 minutes. But on the whole, I found the episode kind of frustrated, kind of dull, and ultimately kind of just blah, and lost the thread of what was a really interesting setup. So yeah, Revolution of the Daleks. What did you think about it? If you loved it, please let me know. I would honestly, I would love to hear people being really excited about this episode. I would love that joy and love to vicariously experience your joy. But let me know down in the comments what your thoughts on this episode were. I am very excited for where this is setting up for the next series. Let me know what your speculation is on that. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more reviews, hopefully much more positive reviews going forward. But beyond that, I hope that you, as always, have a wonderful beginning to your 2021 and live long and prosper. Thank you to all of my patrons this month, but especially Amanda Ronye Idanya, Catherine Lambeth, Ashley Ellen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Bergmoss, Ashlyn Solstice, Michael D., Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Ulysses the Pagan, Randy Thompson, Munir Amlani, Chamomile T., Stephen Schuhart, Wellington Marcus, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Roar, Christina Dalliance, Dominic Noble, John Steele, Michael Beam. She sells seashells by the seashore of Bajor. William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, The Sir Spence, BBD, Hannah F., Nathan Olson, Jason Knott, Andrew Jorgensen, Chris Brown, Jasmine, Maeve, Bree Beecher, Subraxis, Skylar Gray, Nathan Steele, Jane Packard and Chloe Dollar, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Gretchen Badger, Geek Filter, Bush, Celestial Dawn, Din, Sarah Bastam, Polly Mina, Jacob Tovar, Piston Twisted Garage, Lily, Jean Mithune, Andrew Lamori, Lysa, Zone 1 Librarian, Michael Hardy, Corey Honkanen, and KT Dunn. Thank you so much to all of you. You're quite literally making my dreams come true, so I cannot tell you how thankful I am.